He mocked me, used me, and left me with nothing, but he never expected that everything would turn against him. Looking back, the signs were always there. The way he talked down to me, the little insults disguised as jokes, the way he made me feel like I was never enough. For 3 years, I had been Jake's biggest supporter. Through his struggles, his career setbacks, his insecurities, I was there. I helped him with his resume, listened to every rant about his awful boss, even covered for him financially when things got tough. And how did he repay me? By humiliating me in front of everyone. It was supposed to be his big night, a fancy corporate dinner at an upscale restaurant, celebrating his promotion. Jake had been going on about it for weeks, telling me how important it was, how all the right people would be there. He told me to dress my best, to make a good impression. I took it seriously. I spent hours getting ready, picking the perfect dress, styling my hair just the way he liked it. I wanted to make him proud. But the moment we arrived, something felt off. Jake barely acknowledged me. No warm smile, no arm around my waist, just a quick glance before he walked ahead, leaving me trailing behind. His coworkers greeted him with enthusiasm. When they noticed me, their smiles felt forced. One of them, a sleek blonde woman I recognized from his office, smirked before whispering something to the man next to her. He laughed. My stomach twisted. Jake didn't introduce me. He didn't even look in my direction. I convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just nervous. Maybe he wanted to impress his boss. I had no idea what was coming. The evening dragged on, with Jake holding court at the center of the conversation. Every time I tried to chime in, he talked over me or brushed me off. At one point, I mentioned something about my own job. Jake let out a loud sigh before shaking his head. He said I wouldn't understand. His industry was a whole different level. His coworkers chuckled. I stared at him. 3 years together, and this is how he saw me? I swallowed the lump in my throat and pushed my food around my plate. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But then, the final blow came. One of his coworkers, Matt, I think, asked how we met. Before I could answer, Jake laughed. Then, in front of everyone, he said it. She wouldn't stop chasing me. I finally gave in. Laughter. All around me. I felt my face burn. That wasn't true. That wasn't true at all. I had been hesitant when we first met. It was Jake who had pursued me, who had made me feel special, who had promised me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. And now? Now I was some desperate girl who had clung to him until he gave up? I looked at him, waiting for him to say it was a joke. To correct himself. He didn't. Instead, he took a sip of his drink, shrugged, and said I should be grateful he was with me. I stopped breathing. My hands clenched under the table. 3 years. 3 years of love, of loyalty, of sacrifices. And this is how he saw me? As a joke? A charity case? Something inside me snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. Instead, I sat there. Still. Silent. Jake barely noticed. He had already moved on to another story, another joke. He thought he had won. Then the check came. The waiter placed it in front of Jake. He looked at it for a moment, then slid it across the table. To me. I stared at him. He smirked. He said I had this, right? Laughter. Again. It was too much. Slowly, I reached for my purse. Pulled out my card. Placed it on the bill. Jake looked satisfied. He patted my hand like I was some obedient pet. That's when I smiled. Not a sad smile. Not a broken one. A knowing smile. Because at that moment, I realized something. Jake thought he had won. But he had no idea what was coming. And when his world fell apart, I would be the one watching. I walked out of that restaurant a different person. The woman who had walked in? She was gone. The one who had spent 3 years shrinking herself for Jake, forgiving every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment he made her feel small. I wasn't her anymore. Jake didn't realize it yet, but the night he humiliated me, that was the night I stopped caring. The ride home was silent. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't feeling anything. I just sat there, staring out the window, replaying the night in my head. Every smug laugh, every dismissive glance. That final moment when Jake pushed the bill toward me, expecting me to pay. And I let him. Not because I was weak, but because I had already decided that it was the last thing I would ever give him. I reached my apartment, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the couch. My phone was buzzing, messages from friends, from people who had been at the dinner. I ignored them all. Then, my phone buzzed again. A text from Jake. He wrote that I had been too quiet on the ride home, that he hoped I wasn't overreacting. I read the message. Then I laughed. Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. I felt free. And Jake? He had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I didn't text him. Didn't call. Didn't answer when he sent another message, telling me he had a lot on his plate, and hoped I wasn't being too emotional about last night. I just disappeared. And that? That was the one thing Jake never expected. For years, I had been predictable. Always answering. Always supporting. Always giving. But now? Now, I was gone. And Jake? He didn't like that. 3 days passed before he called me. I didn't answer. Then came the messages. First, they were casual. Hey, haven't heard from you. Everything good. Then, they got confused. Are you seriously ignoring me? What's your problem? Then annoyed. Oh, grow up. You're being ridiculous. I watched the messages pile up. But I said nothing. And that silence? It was louder than any response I could have given. Because Jake was losing control. And men like him? They don't handle that well. By the end of the week, the stories started spreading. A mutual friend reached out, hesitating before telling me that Jake had been talking. He had told people that I was being dramatic. That I was just taking time to cool off because I was too emotional. He told them he was giving me space. Like he was doing me a favor. I smiled. Because I already knew what was coming next. Jake sent another message that night. He wrote that he had been thinking a lot, and that maybe, just maybe, he had gone too far. He said he was willing to talk. As if he was doing me a favor. I could picture it perfectly, Jake, sending that message, expecting me to jump at the chance to fix things. Because that's what I used to do. But not this time. I didn't want to fix things. I wanted to watch them fall apart. And Jake? He was about to fall the hardest. Silence. That was the best part. For years, I had lived in a cycle. Jake would say something cruel, brush me off, make me feel small. I would get upset, but I would always come back. Apologize. Try to smooth things over. But this time, I was gone. And Jake was starting to realize it. The first week after the breakup, he had been cocky. He thought I was just cooling off. That I would come back like I always did. But by the second week, I could tell he was cracking. Mutual friends started reaching out, saying Jake had been asking about me. At first, he pretended not to care. He told them I was being childish, that I was just dragging things out. But then his tone changed. He started asking questions. Had I said anything about him? Was I dating someone new? That's when I knew. He wasn't just curious. He was worried. Then, one night, I got a message from Vanessa. She told me Jake had started talking. Spreading little half-truths. He told people that we had broken up on good terms, that it was mutual. I laughed. Because if that was true, then why was he still so obsessed with what I was doing? Jake had spent years making sure he was always one step ahead. Always the one with the upper hand. And now? He was losing control. A few nights later, I went out with Vanessa and Emma. I hadn't been out in weeks. It felt good. Drinks, music, laughter. No Jake. No drama. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Until I saw him. Jake. Standing by the bar. Watching me. Our eyes met, and for a split second, I saw something new in his expression. Not confidence. Not amusement. Doubt. He hadn't expected to see me happy. Hadn't expected me to look like I was doing just fine without him. I turned back to my friends and laughed at a joke Vanessa made, making sure Jake saw. When I glanced back, he was gone. The next day, my phone buzzed. It was Jake. He sent a long message about how he had been thinking a lot and realized he had made mistakes. He said he didn't mean to hurt me. He said he wanted to clear the air. I stared at the message for a long time. A few weeks ago, I would have fallen for it. I would have believed he was changing. But now, I knew exactly what this was. Jake wasn't sorry. He was just losing control. And this was his last attempt to pull me back in. I didn't respond. And that silence? That was the moment Jake realized he had lost. Silence was my greatest weapon. Jake had spent years controlling the narrative, making sure he always had the upper hand. He expected me to come back, to explain myself, to give him the reaction he wanted. But I gave him nothing. And that was driving him insane. The first sign of his downfall came a few days later. Vanessa texted me, saying that Jake had been acting off. At work, he wasn't the confident, charming guy everyone knew. He was distracted, on edge, constantly checking his phone. His boss noticed. His coworkers noticed. And when someone joked that he was off his game, Jake snapped. He told them I had been spreading lies about him. That I was bitter. That I was trying to ruin his life. Vanessa laughed when she told me. Because the truth? I hadn't said a single word about him. He was ruining himself. A week later, I got another text. Not from Jake. From Emma. She said Jake had started telling people that I was obsessed with him. That I was playing games to make him look bad. That I was waiting for him to come back. I actually laughed. Because that's what men like Jake do. They can't accept that they were the problem. So they rewrite the story. They turn themselves into the victim. Because the idea that someone could simply walk away from them, that's the one thing they can't handle. Then, the rumors started turning against him. His coworkers, his biggest supporters, started questioning him. Because if I was the one obsessed with him, then why was he still talking about me? If I was the one spreading lies, then why hadn't anyone actually heard me say anything? Slowly, people stopped believing him. They stopped trusting him. And without that trust, Jake wasn't the charming guy anymore. He was just another liar. And that was the beginning of his end. Silence was my greatest weapon. Jake had spent years controlling the narrative, making sure he always had the upper hand. He expected me to come back, to explain myself, to give him the reaction he wanted. But I gave him nothing. And that was driving him insane. The first sign of his downfall came a few days later. Vanessa texted me, saying that Jake had been acting off. At work, he wasn't the confident, charming guy everyone knew. He was distracted, on edge, constantly checking his phone. His boss noticed. His coworkers noticed. And when someone joked that he was off his game, Jake snapped. He told them I had been spreading lies about him. That I was bitter. That I was trying to ruin his life. Vanessa laughed when she told me. Because the truth? I hadn't said a single word about him. He was ruining himself. A week later, I got another text. Not from Jake. From Emma. She said Jake had started telling people that I was obsessed with him. That I was playing games to make him look bad. That I was waiting for him to come back. I actually laughed. Because that's what men like Jake do. They can't accept that they were the problem. So they rewrite the story. They turn themselves into the victim. Because the idea that someone could simply walk away from them, that's the one thing they can't handle. At first, Jake still had allies. His friends defended him. His coworkers tried to ignore the tension. But the problem with men like Jake? They don't know when to stop talking. He kept bringing me up. Kept repeating the same lies. And people? They started noticing. They started wondering. If I was really the one who was obsessed, then why was it Jake who couldn't shut up about me? A few days later, Vanessa called me, her voice shaking from laughter. She said Jake had messed up. Badly. Apparently, he had been distracted at work. So distracted that he missed a deadline on a major project. His boss? Not happy. Jake had always been the golden boy at his job. The one who could do no wrong. But now he was slipping. And once people see weakness, they stop treating you like you're untouchable. Then, it started happening outside of work. People he thought were on his side started distancing themselves. At first, it was small. Missed calls. Ignored texts. Then it became obvious. One of his closest friends, Matt, unfollowed him on Instagram. Another stopped inviting him out. Jake's social circle was shrinking. Because nobody wants to be around a guy whose entire personality is playing the victim. The moment Jake realized he was losing everything, he tried to crawl back. It started with a text. A long, emotional message about how he had been thinking a lot, about how he realized he had made mistakes. Then, he said he wanted to talk. I stared at the message for a long time. A few months ago, I would have fallen for it. I would have believed he was changing. But now, I knew exactly what this was. Jake wasn't sorry. He was just losing control. And this? This was his last attempt to pull me back in. I didn't respond. And that silence? That was the moment Jake realized he had lost. Jake had always been in control. Or at least, he thought he was. For years, he had dictated the pace of our relationship. When he needed support, I was there. When he wanted space, I gave it. When he made a mistake, I was the one apologizing. But now? Now, I was gone. And Jake was spiraling. At first, he thought he could handle it. He told his friends he was better off without me. That I had been too much work anyway. That he was moving on. But the thing about men like Jake? They need an audience. And when people stopped listening, that's when the real panic set in. A week after his last attempt to clear the air, Jake tried again. This time, he sent a simple message. Hey, can we talk? I ignored it. An hour later, another one. I just want to make things right. Then a paragraph. He told me he had been going through a lot. That work had been stressful. That he had been in a bad place the night of the dinner. That he didn't mean to hurt me. I stared at the message for a long time. And then? I left. Because Jake wasn't sorry. He was just losing. And now? He wanted me to fix it. When I didn't respond, the messages got longer. He told me he missed me. That he didn't realize how much I meant to him until I was gone. That he had been talking to a therapist. That he was working on himself. He even said he was reading books about healthy relationships. Jake, the man who had once laughed at me for suggesting couples therapy. The man who had told me I was too emotional when I tried to talk about my feelings. Now, suddenly, he was changing? I didn't believe it for a second. And deep down? I don't think he did either. Then, something unexpected happened. Jake stopped pretending. At first, his Instagram had been full of fake happiness. Pictures of nights out, fake smiles with his friends, captions about new beginnings. But then, one night, Vanessa sent me a screenshot. A new post. It was a picture of Jake, sitting alone at a bar. The caption? Some people just love to watch you fall. I rolled my eyes. Because I hadn't done anything to Jake. He was falling all on his own. A few nights later, I was home when my phone buzzed again. It was another message from Jake. But this time, it wasn't just a plea. It was a warning. You think you won? You have no idea what you started. I exhaled slowly. Because now? Now, Jake was getting desperate. And desperate men? They make mistakes. Big ones. Ones that I knew would destroy him for good. Jake was unraveling. He had spent years controlling me, keeping me small, making sure I was always chasing him. But now? I was gone. And he couldn't handle it. The fake apologies hadn't worked. The guilt trips had failed. The subtle threats? Completely ignored. And men like Jake? They don't just give up. They self-destruct. Vanessa was the one who noticed it first. She called me late one night, her voice buzzing with something between excitement and disbelief. She said Jake had been drinking more, showing up to work hungover, snapping at his coworkers. And the best part? People were starting to talk. The same friends who had once laughed with him at that dinner? The ones who had smirked while he humiliated me? Now, they were distancing themselves. Because nobody wants to be around a man who is spiraling. Then came the real disaster. A company event. Another fancy dinner. Only this time, Jake wasn't the center of attention. He was the joke. Vanessa sent me a message that night. She said he showed up drunk. Slurred his words. Told a story about some crazy ex who tried to ruin his life. His boss? Not impressed. His coworkers? Whispering. Laughing. Jake had built his entire career on being the charming guy, the one everyone liked. But now? Now, he was just pathetic. Jake realized too late that he was losing everything. And when men like him start to lose, they don't try to change. They try to rewrite the story. A few days later, Vanessa sent me another screenshot. It was a long, emotional post on Jake's private Instagram account. A dramatic, self-pitying rant about learning from mistakes and how some people only want to tear you down. And the best part? He didn't name me. But he didn't have to. Because in the comments, his friends were already making guesses. You're better off, bro. Some people can't handle a real man. You'll bounce back. It was laughable. Because Jake wasn't trying to grow. He was trying to control the narrative. And when he realized that wasn't working, he finally snapped. It started small. One night, I got a notification. A text. From an unknown number. I already knew who it was. I opened it. You think you won? You have no idea what you started. I rolled my eyes. Because this was Jake's final move. Not an apology. Not an attempt to fix things. Just pure desperation. He wanted to scare me. Wanted me to respond. To acknowledge him. But the only thing I felt was relief. Because this message? It wasn't a threat. It was admission of defeat. Jake had finally realized. I wasn't playing his game anymore. Jake had finally admitted defeat. Or at least, that's what he wanted me to think. His final text, "You win. Congrats," wasn't surrender. It was a trap. Because men like Jake? They don't just disappear. They wait. They plot. They search for a way back in. And when they realize you're not coming back, they take their last shot. It happened a week later. I was finally moving on. Finally breathing. Vanessa, Emma, and I were out, celebrating Vanessa's promotion. It was the first time in months that I felt light, like I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's problems. Then Vanessa stiffened. She touched my arm and said, "Don't look now," but Jake just walked in. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face calm. I turned my head, and there he was. Standing at the bar watching me. Our eyes met. And for the first time, he looked unsure. Not smug. Not confident. Just lost. Jake had expected me to be broken. To be struggling without him. But instead, I was thriving. And that was killing him. I thought he would ignore me. Pretend I wasn't there. Keep up whatever illusion he had left. But then, he did something I never saw coming. He walked over. I could feel Vanessa and Emma tense beside me, but I didn't move. I just watched as Jake stopped a few feet away, shifting awkwardly like he wasn't sure what to say. Then, finally, he exhaled sharply. He said, "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. Just tilted my head, waiting. His jaw clenched. He said he just wanted to clear the air. That he wanted closure. Closure. I almost laughed. Jake didn't want closure. He wanted control. And when he realized I wasn't taking the bait, his mask slipped. His voice dropped lower. He said, "You really don't care anymore, do you?" I pretended to think about it. Then I smiled. And I walked away. That moment? That was the last time I ever saw Jake. Because the thing about men like him? They don't survive being ignored. And when they finally realize they've lost, they disappear. Not because they want to, but because they have nowhere else to go. And Jake? He had just run out of options. Jake was finally gone. No more texts. No more dramatic social media posts. No more desperate attempts to drag me back into his world. For the first time in years, I felt free. But men like Jake? They don't just accept defeat. They wait. And when they realize they've lost their grip on you, they make one last move. It had been a month since I last saw Jake. By then, my life had completely changed. I had a new apartment. A new job opportunity. I was finally focused on me. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. A new email. From Jake. I hesitated before opening it. It was long. Too long. The subject line? "I need to say this." I skimmed the first few lines. He wrote that he had been doing a lot of thinking. That he realized he had made mistakes. That he never meant to hurt me. I scoffed. Jake had spent years making me feel small. He had humiliated me in front of his friends, mocked me, discarded me like I was nothing. Now, suddenly, he was remorseful? I kept reading. And then, buried in the second half of his message, I saw the real reason he was reaching out. He wrote that things hadn't been going well for him. That work had been stressful. That people were treating him differently. That he felt alone. Then, the final sentence. I just need a second chance. I stared at the screen. And then? I laughed. Jake wasn't sorry. He wasn't apologizing because he had changed. He was losing. And now? He wanted me to save him. Because his plan had backfired. After the breakup, he had expected to come out on top. He thought he would be the one who moved on first. The one who had the better life. But now? His job was on shaky ground. His friends were pulling away. His reputation, the thing he cared about most, was falling apart. And the worst part? I wasn't doing anything to him. Jake had destroyed himself. And now, in his desperation, he was trying to crawl back. I thought about ignoring the email, blocking him, deleting it. But then I decided Jake deserved one last message. I typed 3 words. Not my problem. Send. Then, I blocked his email. And just like that, Jake was nothing more than a name I used to know. And my life? Had never felt lighter. Jake was officially out of my life. His number? Blocked. His emails? Deleted. His existence? Irrelevant. For the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing fresh air. No more walking on eggshells. No more waiting for the next passive-aggressive comment. No more being his punching bag. I had one. Or so I thought. Because men like Jake? They don't let go that easily. And when they realize they've truly lost, they become dangerous. It had been 2 weeks since I sent my last message, not my problem. 2 weeks of complete silence. Then, one morning, Vanessa called. She sounded hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should even tell me. Then she sighed and said, "Jake's been asking about you." I frowned. She explained that he had been reaching out to mutual friends, trying to run into people who might still talk to me. He wasn't angry anymore. He was pathetic. She said he told people he just wanted to make things right. That he hoped I would give him the chance to explain. I exhaled slowly. Jake wasn't looking for closure. He was looking for a way back in. Then it got worse. Vanessa sent me a screenshot. Jake had posted about me again. A vague, dramatic caption under a black and white photo of him staring out a window. Some people never appreciate what they had until it's gone. The comments were exactly what I expected. You deserve better, bro. She'll regret it one day. Some people just can't handle real love. I rolled my eyes. Because I wasn't the one who had lost something. Jake was. And now? He was finally realizing it. A few nights later, it happened. I was walking home when I saw a figure leaning against the wall near my building. My stomach twisted. Jake. He looked different. His usual perfect appearance? Gone. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair a mess, dark circles under his eyes. For the first time ever, he didn't look like the guy who always had everything under control. He looked defeated. I stopped a few feet away. He lifted his head and let out a slow breath. He said, "I just want to talk." I didn't answer. He ran a hand through his hair. His voice cracked when he spoke again. He said, "I don't know who I am without you." I tilted my head, studying him. This was the real Jake. Not the charming, confident man he pretended to be. Not the manipulator who played games with my emotions. Just a broken person who had finally realized that he wasn't invincible. He exhaled sharply. He said, "You really don't care anymore, do you?" I smiled. And then? I walked past him. Without a word. Without a second glance. Because Jake's biggest fear wasn't losing me. It was becoming irrelevant. And that's exactly what he was now. I walked past Jake without looking back. That was the moment he truly ceased to exist in my world. No dramatic confrontation. No final words. No second chances. Just silence. And that was the most powerful thing I could have given him. Because men like Jake, they don't fear heartbreak. They don't fear losing people. They fear becoming irrelevant. And now, that's exactly what he was. After that night, Jake finally disappeared. No more texts. No more emails. No more pathetic attempts to run into people I knew. For weeks, I waited for one last move. A final desperate attempt to claw his way back into my life. But it never came. Because by then, Jake had lost everything. His job? Hanging by a thread. His friends? Gone. His reputation? Destroyed. And me? I was thriving. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. Jake did it all to himself. Months passed. Then, one night, I got a text from an unknown number. I already knew who it was before I even opened it. It was short. Simple. I hope you're happy. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I smiled. Because for the first time in forever, I truly was. I deleted the message. Blocked the number. And just like that, Jake was nothing more than a name I used to know. And my story was just beginning.